Hello and welcome to Peerlyst Community TV. I'm Frank Allhurst, your host today, and we are going to talk about the concepts of machine learning, behavioral analytics. My guest today is an expert in that area, Stephan Jou, a member of the Peerlyst community and CTO of Interset. But we won't hold that against him. You know how a lot of these guys want to do the marketing speak. Stephan doesn't do that. He's going to get right down to the facts and tell us what we need to know. Stephan is an expert in security analytics, machine learning, and advanced heuristics. And he's going to offer some sage advice on behavioral analytics. Hi, Stephan, and thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Great. I'm glad you were able to take the time out of your busy schedule to talk to us. I'm going to hit you with a hard question right off the bat. Can you explain to us what exactly behavioral analytics is?
It is the worst buzzword ever created by man. Fundamentally, it's pretty simple, right? Behavioral analytics is doing analytics on behaviors. But I think what's interesting is kind of the motivation behind the term. You know, when we look at the challenges that we have in cybersecurity, a lot of it is trying to detect things that are unusual, right? Unusual lateral movement, unusual volumes of data being accumulated on a staging server, unusual access to sections of IP that are not expected, you know, weird login behaviors. The key words in everything I've said are things like unusual, weird, suspicious. Believe it or not, those are all things that we can compute using math. Right? So we don't always need to have a human analyst be looking at log data to be able to figure out and look at multiple sets of data to understand what's unusual, what patterns are weird. We can actually do that automatically by math. And that is, I think, the motivation behind behavioral analytics, to take math, take the log data around these behaviors, and use that to find suspicious and interesting things.
Oh, yeah, it actually does sound like something that would be very difficult to do by hand. So
absolutely.
I guess my next question is going to be, you know, how does machine learning fit into that?
Well, you just said it. I mean, it is hard to do this by hand, right? If you had an infinite number of people, an infinite number of resources to look at all the log data that we're collecting, then great, you're all set. But no one has that, right? So what machine learning does for a living, it allows you to scale what's intuitive in these analysts' heads in a way that mathematically is very robust and can scale just by throwing compute power at it. And it can be done in a way that's actually very, very efficient. In fact, a lot of these machine learning models are real time. Basically, machine learning, as the term implies, it's ways in math and statistics to learn what's normal, learn what normal patterns are. And that's important because if you can figure out what's normal, then you can instantly detect when the abnormal happens. And that's how machine learning sort of fits into behavioral analytics.
Wow, that's an interesting point. Because I gather if you were doing this all by hand, there'd be no way you could do it in real time.
That's right. That's right. Especially when we're looking at now, you know, terabytes or even petabytes of events flowing in to a typical enterprise. We've got some customers that are ingesting billions of events every day, and I'm sure that's not uncommon among your audience, right? So how can you possibly manage all of that information and analyze it for patterns without taking advantage of computational methods like machine learning? It's kind of the only way to go.
So that really kind of means that the heuristics themselves have to adapt and change as this data comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, when we look at cyber attack, target attack, insider threat, compromised accounts, we all have a notion of what the typical patterns are. You know, these guys, there's a very typical playbook, right? You see that in the life cycle of an attack. There's different stages, and while the details vary, the overall patterns of behavior are the same. They are detectable and repeatable. And so that's the heuristics part of it, right? You should look for a solution that actually has codified principled patterns that we've learned over time. Okay, there's almost always a staging server. There's almost always a gathering phase. There's almost always a compromised account involved. And take those heuristics that we've developed and actually use math to make it adaptable so that the math can fill in the details. Sometimes it's server 1, sometimes it's server 2. Sometimes it's 5 gigabytes, which is unusual. Other times it's only 2, right? So that's why it's important to be adaptable and heuristic based.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, Obviously, this sounds like a better way to deal with security problems than traditional methods. I mean, you want to expand on that, why it's better this way?
Sure. I mean, I do want to point out that this is not a replacement for traditional methods, but this is a very useful and scalable extra tool to have in your tool chest. Everyone knows that security is sort of riddled with things like rules and thresholds and signatures, and that's great, and that is still very useful. But there are challenges with making that run at scale, right? So, signatures are always going to be behind. You can't always have enough staff or time to maintain a set of rules. You don't want to have to go in and pick the perfect threshold for your entire company, right? That doesn't exist. So, you know, it's always better if you can have a tool that you can trust that could do these things for you, that can dynamically keep up in a very adaptive manner and still find the things that are interesting to you, those interesting indicators of compromise. You know, as an example, you know, SIMs are great. I'm a big fan of SIMs because they collect a lot of valuable data, but they're really good if you know exactly what you're looking for. So what's the exact query string to tell me what's interesting in that data? So one way of thinking about behavioral analytics is something that sits on top of the type of data that gets collected in a SIM, but does the searches for you. It will draw your attention to the things that are suspicious and abnormal.
So what should our viewers look for in a solution that uses, you know, behavior and machine learning and elements like that? What are like the top things it should do?
Great question. I've actually had a lot of time to think about this because I've actually spent almost 15 years now in the industry, not in security, but in analytics, just building new analytical products for companies like IBM and Cognos. And during my time, I felt very strongly that you kind of need three ingredients that are critical to look for in any analytics solution, including cybersecurity ones. One is you need great math, right? The math has to be principled in order to be effective. I see a lot of companies that are struggling applying sort of traditional methods in statistics and trying to apply it to big data. There are lots of reasons why that doesn't work. You'll start to get lots of false positives. So you need to make sure that the math is solid. That's key ingredient number one. Number two, it has to be scalable, right? If you cannot do these calculations in real time to keep up with all the data that we're all collecting every day, every minute, every nanosecond, then it's not going to be effective for you. So it has to be scalable. And obviously, there's a cost component as well. You don't want to have to deploy 100 machines in order to solve the problem that you have, right? So it has to be scalable from that sense as well. And third component, the UI has to be consumable. And this is really important. Some of the math that we're doing is hard, right? So you don't want to require everyone that's an operator of your solution to have a Six Sigma, you know, black belt, PhD, white lab coat, right? It has to be super easy for them to be able to instantly see what's going on. Effective use of visualizations, real-time responses, natural language, all of that is really important. So you need those three things: great math, scalability, consumable UI.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, you know, when it comes to the security arena, there's a lot of snake oil out there. How can you tell if that a solution like this is actually working? I mean, how do you know it works?
Well, there are some really good indicators out there. You are right. There is a lot of snake oil out there. I spend a lot of time sort of trying to educate people on what's real and what's not real. A really simple thing to look for is see if the solution actually has customers that are willing to stand up for the solution. See if they have stories that can tell about how the math and the solution actually caught a bad guy or compromised account. So look for those. Failing that, look for at least a solution that will let you try out their solution on your data, right? The ones that are not afraid of what they've done will be happy and should be happy to let you upload some historical log data and just show you what they've got sort of behind the scenes.
That sounds like some great advice, and I think our audience members will really appreciate that, you know, the honesty behind that as well. And I want to thank you for joining us today. We're almost out of time. Anything in closing you want to say?
I will say one thing. Math is awesome, and math is magical, but it's not magic, right? So let's not also go too far and think that math can solve everything in the world. But I can say that when done properly, it can be a super effective tool for you. So give it a shot.
Yeah.
I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Okay, so stay in school, kids, and
stay in school.
STEM careers. All right, I want to thank Stephan for joining us today, and I want to thank everybody for watching. Those of you looking for more information on heuristics and analytics, please look at our blogs on Peerlyst. Don't forget to take a look at the Interset product page, and be sure to follow Stephan as well on Peerlyst, because I'm sure he'll be able to offer some sage advice in the future. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Frank.